There is a promise made in the marble halls of Washington, D.C., spoken from podiums and written into law. It's a promise of uplift, of assistance, of an end to the crushing weight of poverty that has disproportionately burdened black communities for generations. Since the war on poverty began in the 1960s, a river of money has flowed from the federal government, a river that has swelled over the decades into an ocean. The total spending on means-tested anti-poverty programs is now measured in the tens of trillions of dollars. In fiscal year 2024 alone, federal spending on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, the nation's largest nutrition assistance program, totaled $99.8 billion. It's a figure so vast it's almost impossible to comprehend. This money was meant to be a lifeline. It was meant to build a bridge from dependency to self-sufficiency. It was meant to correct historical injustices and create a more equitable future. But what if that bridge was never meant to be crossed? What if the promise was a mirage? Look at the numbers. Look at the reality on the ground. After 60 years of unprecedented spending, what's the result? While the overall poverty rate has seen declines, the rate for black Americans remains stubbornly high. As of 2024, the black poverty rate was 17.3%, reaching a decade high of 30.5% in Washington, D.C. For children, the picture is even more grim. In 2021, thanks to temporary pandemic-era aid, the black child poverty rate hit a historic low of 8%. But by 2024, after that aid expired, it had skyrocketed to nearly 23%. That means today, almost 1 in 4 black children lives in poverty. The wealth gap hasn't closed. In fact, it's a chasm. As of 2022, the median net worth of a black household was just $44,900. For a white household, it was $284,310. The homeownership gap, a key driver of generational wealth, remains vast. In late 2023, the black homeownership rate was just 45.9% compared to 73.8% for white households. And the income gap persists. In the third quarter of 2024, full-time black workers earned a median weekly wage that was 18.8% less than their white counterparts. The promise has been broken. The money has been spent, but the problem, for millions, remains. And that leads to the central, unsettling question of our time. Where did all the money go? Federal programs have poured trillions of dollars into ending poverty in black communities. But what if that money isn't just being wasted? What if it's being used to fund the very poverty it claims to fight? A darker reality is unfolding, where government funds are systematically diverted through fraud, creating a cycle of dependency instead of empowerment. We're going to follow the money. To understand the depth of this failure, you have to go back to the beginning. Picture the 1960s. The civil rights movement is reshaping the nation, and there's a genuine, powerful momentum to address the deep-seated economic injustices plaguing black America. President Lyndon B. Johnson, in his State of the Union address, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. The intention, at least on the surface, was noble. Programs were created: food stamps, now called SNAP, Medicaid, housing assistance, direct cash benefits. The idea was simple: provide a safety net so strong that no one could fall through cracks. It was sold as a temporary hand-up, a way to give families the stability they needed to get on their feet. Decade after decade, politician after politician, from both sides of the aisle, has stood before the American people and reaffirmed this commitment. They've announced new initiatives, expanded budgets, and promised that this time they'd get it right. They promised empowerment. They promised economic justice. They promised a pathway to the American dream. The spending grew and grew. Just one program, SNAP, served an average of 41.7 million people a month in fiscal year 2024, with federal spending for the year totaling nearly $100 billion. Projections show that overall welfare spending is on a path to continue rising significantly over the next decade. The scale of this financial commitment is monumental. It is, without question, the largest and most sustained effort to combat poverty in human history. So, with all this money being pumped into the system, the results should be obvious. We should see thriving communities, generational poverty all but eliminated, and wealth gaps rapidly closing. But that's not what we see. What we see is the cold, hard reality of the numbers. Even with some progress, the poverty rate for Black Americans remains disproportionately high. For a family of four in 2024, the federal poverty line is around $31,200 a year. Think about that. Decades of spending trillions of dollars, and still millions of Black men, women, and children live below that line. But even that official number hides a darker truth. The Census Bureau also has something called the Supplemental Poverty Measure, or SPM, which is considered more accurate because it accounts for government aid and the real cost of living. Under this measure, the situation looks even more fragile. The Black child poverty rate, for instance, jumped from a low of 8% in 2021 to nearly 23% by 2024, after temporary pandemic programs ended. Once that extra support was gone, the underlying instability was exposed. This isn't just about income. It's about every measure of economic well-being. Let's talk about wealth, the assets you own that can be passed down. Real wealth is what allows a family to weather a storm, send a kid to college without crippling debt, or start a business. In 2022, the median net worth for a Black household was $44,900, while for white households, it was nearly $285,000. That isn't a gap, it's a canyon. A huge part of that is driven by homeownership. For generations, owning a home has been the main vehicle for middle-class wealth creation in America. Yet today, the gap in homeownership between Black and white Americans is nearly 28 percentage points. While the Black homeownership rate has seen some gains, it stood at only 45.9% in the last quarter of 2023, compared to 73.8% for white households. What about the money you earn from a job? The story is the same. As of late 2024, Black workers on average earn almost 19% less than their white counterparts. And we're often sold the line that education is the great equalizer. But the data tells a different story. According to one 2024 analysis, Black women with a bachelor's degree earn only about 63 cents for every dollar a white man with the same degree makes. So we are left with a paradox, a grand deception. A fortune is spent on a system that promises to alleviate poverty. Yet the communities it's meant to help remain trapped. The money flows, the budgets expand, the promises are repeated, but the needle barely moves. This isn't just an accident. It's not just inefficiency. To understand why this is happening, we have to look deeper. We have to see where the money is actually going and how the system itself has been engineered, not to create independence, but to create a permanent state of dependency. We have to look at the multi-billion-dollar industry of fraud that has grown like a cancer within these programs. The system isn't just failing to solve poverty. It is actively funding it. So, how is it possible? How can a system supposedly designed to help end up causing so much harm? The answer lies in a toxic combination of two forces: a structure of perverse incentives that can punish work, and a system so vulnerable to fraud that it has become a feeding trough for criminals. Let's start with the foundational problem, something economists call the welfare trap, or more technically, high effective marginal tax rates. It sounds complicated, but the concept is tragically simple. Imagine a single mother with 2 children. Let's call her Sarah. She's unemployed and relies on a combination of government programs to survive. She receives SNAP benefits for food, a housing voucher to help with rent, and Medicaid for her family's health care. Together, these benefits provide a crucial, if modest, safety net. Now, Sarah's offered a full-time job. It's a step up, a chance to build a career, and earn her own way. She wants to take it. It's the very definition of what these programs are supposed to encourage. But then she does the math. As her earned income rises, her benefits begin to disappear. This is the benefits cliff. Her SNAP allowance is reduced. Her contribution to rent goes up. And, most terrifyingly, if her income crosses a certain threshold, she could lose her family's Medicaid eligibility entirely. When she adds it all up, she can make a horrifying discovery. For every extra dollar she earns, she might lose 70, 80, or in some cases, even more than 100 cents in withdrawn benefits and new taxes. She's working 40 hours a week, paying for childcare, paying for transportation, but her actual disposable income, The money she has left to live on has barely increased. In some scenarios, it might even go down. The system can make it more rational for her to turn down the job than to take it. It punishes ambition. It traps people at the bottom of the economic ladder. It transforms an intended safety net into a cage. This design flaw creates the perfect breeding ground for the second, more explosive part of this mechanism: fraud. The sheer volume of money, combined with lax oversight, has turned these anti-poverty programs into a multi-billion-dollar target for organized fraud. Let's be clear. Before the pandemic, fraud in core programs was often estimated to be a small percentage of total costs. But the COVID-19 pandemic blew the doors wide open. In the rush to get aid out, the government suspended many of the guardrails that were in place. The result was one of the greatest thefts of taxpayer dollars in American history. The U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, estimates that fraud in the pandemic-era unemployment programs was likely between $100 billion and $135 billion. The Department of Labor's Inspector General suggested that at least $191 billion in pandemic UI payments could have been improper, with much of that being fraud. Outside experts have placed a figure as high as $400 billion, and recovery has been pitiful. By mid-2023, only a tiny fraction of fraudulent payments had been recovered. This wasn't just small-time opportunism. This was organized crime. Domestic and international crime rings used stolen identities to file thousands of bogus claims, exploiting a system that, for a time, didn't even require proof of prior work. It was a free-for-all. While pandemic fraud was historic, the problem isn't over. It's now rampant in other programs. SNAP fraud, for instance, is a growing crisis. One form, known as skimming, uses devices on card readers to steal EBT card numbers and PINs. The money is then drained from the real accounts within minutes. According to one report, fraudulent SNAP transactions jumped 55% between the last quarter of fiscal year 2024 and the first quarter of fiscal year 2025. In Michigan, payments for fraudulent food stamp claims spiked by 387% between fiscal year 2023 and 2024. It's not just criminals targeting recipients. There's also fraud from within. Retailers authorized to accept SNAP sometimes engage in trafficking, where they give a recipient cash, say 50 cents on the dollar, for their benefits, then bill the government for full amount and pocket the difference. Beyond this, there's a whole ecosystem of grift. Agencies and nonprofits are awarded massive government grants to help the poor. They have slick websites and mission statements full of buzzwords like equity and empowerment. But too often, the money is spent on salaries, administrative costs, conferences, and consulting fees, with very little ever reaching the people it was intended to help. It becomes a self-perpetuating industry where the existence of poverty guarantees a continued flow of funding for the organizations that claim to be fighting it. This is the mechanism in its full, horrifying detail. A system that can disincentivize work, combined with a flood of poorly overseen money that invites fraud at every level. The incentive structure creates a class of dependents, and the fraud siphons off the resources that might have actually helped them. The government isn't just failing to stop poverty. It is actively, if unintentionally, funding a system that perpetuates it. The consequences of this deeply flawed system are not abstract. They are a devastating human reality that plays out in communities, in families, and the lives of millions. The combination of perverse incentives and rampant fraud doesn't just steal money. It can destroy the very foundations of upward mobility, family, work ethic, and community. We have seen this playbook before. A specific policy in the past played a central, destructive role in the breakdown of the black family, the man-in-the-house rule. Before the expansion of welfare in the 1960s, the black family, while facing immense challenges, was overwhelmingly a two-parent structure. The vast majority of black children were born into two-parent households. Then came the expansion of programs like Aid to Families with Dependent Children, or AFDC. With good intentions, it offered financial support to low-income single mothers. But it came with a cruel catch, the man-in-the-house rule. This rule made a household ineligible for benefits if an able-bodied adult male lived there. The effect was catastrophic. Welfare caseworkers would conduct surprise raids, searching for evidence of a man's presence. A low-income couple was forced into an impossible choice. The father could stay, and the family would get no financial help, likely sinking into utter destitution. Or the father could leave, allowing the mother and children to receive the aid they needed to survive. The system literally paid for the removal of fathers from home. It created a direct financial incentive for family disintegration. While scholars debate the exact weight of this policy compared to other factors, its destructive impact as a contributing factor is undeniable. Today, we're living with the legacy of that rule, compounded by the modern welfare trap. The perverse incentives have changed form, but their function is similar. Instead of explicitly banning a man from the house, the system now makes his paycheck a liability. If a low-income mother marries a father of her children, their combined income often pushes the family over the benefits cliff, leaving them financially worse off than they were apart. The system continues to penalize the formation of a stable, two-parent, working household. The result? The family structure that was once the bedrock of the black community has been systematically eroded. As of the most recent CDC data available, about 69% of black children are born to unmarried mothers. This is not a moral judgment. It is an economic catastrophe. A single-parent household, by definition, has fewer resources, less time, and faces immense stress. Children growing up without a consistently engaged father are more likely to live in poverty, less likely to succeed in school, and more likely to become involved in the criminal justice system. This environment, one where work can be penalized and family formation discouraged, creates a profound psychological shift. It fosters what is known as a cycle of dependency. When children grow up in a household in a neighborhood where the primary source of income is a government check, and where working a low-wage job can feel like a losing game, their entire perception of the world is altered. The rational response to this environment isn't always to strive for the traditional American dream. For some, the rational response is to learn the rules of the system. Working the system becomes a necessary life skill passed down from one generation to the next. This is not because people are lazy. It's because they are logical. They are responding to the incentives laid out before them. When fraud is rampant and seemingly without consequence, it starts to look less like a crime and more like a viable strategy. The human impact is devastating. It can erode ambition. It can replace the pride of self-sufficiency with the learned helplessness of dependency. It disconnects people from the dignity of work. This creates a feedback loop. Communities with high rates of welfare dependency and low rates of labor force participation become less attractive for business investment. Local economies stagnate. Schools decline. The social fabric unravels. And this is the ultimate consequence. The system of federal funding, corrupted by fraud and built on perverse incentives, doesn't just fail to alleviate poverty. It actively cultivates an environment where poverty becomes entrenched and generational. It prevents the accumulation of wealth by penalizing the very behaviors that lead to it: work, saving, and marriage. It's a downward spiral. Fraud siphons off billions. Perverse incentives punish those who try to escape. The resulting family breakdown and community decay create more poverty, which in turn leads to calls for more government funding. The entire corrupt and broken cycle begins again, spinning faster and faster. We began with a promise of a war on poverty, of economic justice, of a bridge to a better life. We followed the money, and we've seen where that promise led. It led to a system where, after spending trillions, the wealth gap between black and white households remains a chasm, with black households holding just a fraction of the wealth of white households as of 2022. It led to a system where black child poverty could nearly triple in just a few years when temporary aid was removed, exposing a deep and terrifying fragility. It led to a system where the gaps in home ownership and income remain as persistent as ever. We've seen the mechanism of this failure, a cruel logic of perverse incentives that can make the climb out of poverty a punishing choice. It can penalize work. It can penalize marriage. It can penalize the very behaviors that build stable families and strong communities. And we've seen how this broken structure has been turned into a hunting ground. We witnessed the historic fraud of the pandemic era, where hundreds of billions of dollars were stolen by criminal syndicates with near impunity. We see the ongoing bleed of resources from programs like SNAP, stolen through high-tech skimming and low-tech trafficking, with fraud incidents surging. We see a cottage industry of groups that have become rich by managing poverty rather than solving it. Finally, we've connected the dots. We've seen how this mechanism doesn't just waste money. It creates a downward spiral. It echoes the destructive legacy of policies like the man-in-the-house rule, contributing to the erosion of the family structure that is essential for any prosperous community. It fosters a cycle of dependency. It erodes ambition and social capital, trapping generations in a state of managed destitution. The conclusion is as inescapable as it is damning. The current system of federal anti-poverty funding isn't just a safety net with a few holes. It's a trap through its structural flaws and vulnerability to fraud. It now serves to finance the very poverty it was created to eliminate. It funds dependency. It subsidizes family breakdown. It rewards crime. This is a truth that transcends politics. This is not about blaming the poor. It is about indicting a system that has betrayed them. It's about acknowledging that a multi-trillion-dollar failure is not something we can afford to ignore any longer. The first step to solving a problem is to see it clearly. If you believe this conversation is important, share this video. Spreading awareness is the only way to begin demanding real change. This cannot be a partisan issue. It is an American crisis, and it's a crisis that requires us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Is this system broken by accident, or is it working exactly as intended? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.